The first bell rang like a sigh. Luke adjusted the frayed strap of his backpack and slipped through the side entrance of Crestwood High, unnoticed as always. His hoodie, dark gray and 2 sizes too big, hung low over his brow. Not by accident. He liked the way it dimmed the fluorescent hallways, the way it softened the stairs. He didn't have a locker. He didn't need one. Everything he owned fit in his bag. He walked with purpose, but not confidence. There was a difference. Head down, shoulders drawn, like a shadow pressed flat against the walls, moving between periods like background noise. Some kids stared. Most didn't bother. A girl whispered near the vending machine, not even subtle. "He's so weird. Always drawing. Doesn't talk to anyone." Another boy laughed. "Probably sketches murder scenes." They didn't know he heard. But he did. He always did. Luke made it to his usual spot before lunch rush. Back table in the corner of the cafeteria, near the emergency exit. Same spot, every day. He opened a worn notebook, its corners soft like cloth. Pages filled with ink, eyes, hands, rooftops, fire escapes, dream places he couldn't reach in real life. He started sketching again, fine lines, patient and steady. A cathedral rising from a street gutter. A tray slammed down nearby. A jock laughed too loud. Careful, quiet kid's gonna curse us with his demon book. Luke didn't flinch, didn't look up, but his pen paused. He could feel it, the heat of judgment, the electric sting behind his ears. They didn't see him. Not really. They saw what they wanted to. A hoodie, a loner, an echo. Creepy, someone muttered as they walked past. He let them pass. Let the noise drown itself. And when it was quiet again, he drew a tiny bird perched on the edge of the rooftop, wings half lifted, frozen in hesitation. The lunch period ticked by like molasses. Luke folded the notebook shut just as the bell rang and stood, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. He was always the first to leave. Always. Because he couldn't risk being late. Because after school wasn't school. It was survival. The library lights hummed overhead, casting a pale halo on the worn carpet. Luke stirred on the beanbag chair tucked between the back shelves, the one no one ever checked. A school-issued hoodie was bunched under his head like a pillow. His backpack hugged his chest like a life vest. One shoe was half off. Outside, morning was breaking. Students would arrive in less than 30 minutes. But Luke had been there all night. The heater in his car had finally given out last week. It was January. Last night, the thermometer dipped below freezing. So he crept through the emergency exit with a paperclip and a prayer just past midnight. Found refuge among books and silence. Curled up between stories that didn't judge. His breath fogged as he sat up slowly, still heavy. Then, hey, a beam of yellow light sliced through the stacks. The voice that followed was tired, gruff, and not in the mood. "You can't be in here. How'd you even get inside?" Luke blinked into the light. The janitor's flashlight felt like a police spotlight. I was just... Words caught in his throat. Not fear. Habit. Save it, the man snapped, pulling a walkie-talkie from his belt. "We got a student sleeping in the library. Unauthorized entry. Principal needs to see this." Luke stood quickly, brushing lint from his hoodie. "I didn't break anything. I just..." Sit. Not a request. An order. So Luke did. 5 minutes later, he was marched through the early light of a sleeping school. The halls he usually ghosted through were now fluorescent and loud. Echoes of footsteps, clipped voices. Eyes turned. Miss Crawford, the attendant's secretary, gasped behind her glasses when he passed. Principal Deemer waited in his office, arms folded. Shirt crisp. Tie tighter than necessary. "Luke Weston," he said, not looking up from a clipboard. 17. Junior, no infractions until now. Luke stayed quiet. What were you doing here at 2 a.m.? Luke hesitated. He wanted to say, I had nowhere else. I've been living in my mom's old car since she died. I only came here because the cold makes my fingers stop working. And I need them to draw, and if I don't draw, I start shaking from the inside But instead, he said nothing, just stared at the wood grain desk. Principal Deemer leaned back in his chair, frowning. Sleeping in a locked school building without permission constitutes trespassing. Library doors were found tampered with. You're suspended. 3 days. Effective immediately. Suspended. The word landed like a slap. He hadn't broken a window, hadn't stolen anything, hadn't shouted or fought or sold pills behind the gym. He just slept. And for that, they were kicking him out. He swallowed hard, nodded once, stood without a word. Outside the front doors, the cold slapped his face. The sun was up now, golden and indifferent. He pulled his hood tighter, crossed the parking lot to the cracked sedan that doubled as a home, climbed inside, shut the door. No sound but the ticking of the dashboard clock. He didn't cry. He just curled up in the back seat and pulled his backpack over his chest like armor. And waited. Monday. The rain hit sideways, hard enough to soak through denim in seconds. Luke's hood was pulled low, the frayed drawstrings clenched in his fists like reins. His sneakers squelched with every step, soles thin from wear, puddles seeping through. He walked with his head down, not out of shame, but out of habit. It was easier to weather a storm when you didn't look at it. The school loomed ahead. A red brick box with clean windows and polished banners. Excellence. Honor. Integrity. He'd read those words every morning since freshman year. Today, they felt like mockery. His suspension was over, but something colder had taken its place. Inside, the air was drier, but heavier. There he is. Library boy. Maybe he just really loves books. Laughter. Low. Sharp. He passed the hallway with the art room, his favorite place, and caught his reflection in the glass. Wet. Hollow-eyed. He looked like the ghost they all treated him as. On the lockers. A meme. It was his face, frozen mid-yawn from a phone shot. Above it, bold white text. Too broke for a bed. It had 50 likes. He knew because he saw it first online. He hadn't said a word since walking in, and no one had said a word to him. Not Miss Green, who used to compliment his sketches. Not Mr. Thomas, who once pulled him aside to say, "There's more to you than you let on." Even they looked through him now. Not cruel, just quiet. And somehow, that was worse. He sat alone at lunch. Not that it was new, but now he felt the watching. Eyes that didn't glance away fast enough. Phones angled not so subtly. A girl at the next table whispered behind her hand, and someone across from her giggled without even looking his way. Guess he finally cracked, he heard someone say. Probably high when they found him. Luke didn't flinch, didn't react. He just opened his sketchbook, the one with the torn spine and water-damaged corners, and drew. Not people, not faces, not today. He drew shadows, heavy ones, cast wide and deep, stretching across the page like storm clouds about to swallow a skyline. When the bell rang, he didn't move right away. He just looked down at the drawing and whispered, almost too soft to hear. They have no idea. Last period ended early that day. Rain hadn't stopped. It drummed on the metal roof like a warning. Luke walked out with his hoodie up. No umbrella, no coat, just silence. The parking lot shimmered with reflections, taillights, storm drains overflowing, the dim glow of fluorescent signs bleeding across puddles. He reached the edge of campus and turned left instead of right. He wasn't going home, because there was no home. There was only the sedan. and a gas station 2 blocks away where he could charge his phone for 15 minutes without being asked to leave if the manager wasn't watching. He walked slowly, breath visible in the damp air, chest tight, but not because of the cold, because of the weight, of every name they called him, of every teacher who didn't ask why, of every student who thought a joke was easier than a question, and of every day he'd survived, unseen. 3 months earlier, it started with a spark, a soft pop, almost like a sigh, behind the walls of a second-story apartment that had always smelled faintly of old fabric and burnt oil. Luke had just finished heating instant ramen on the stove. Midnight. His sister, June, 5 years old and all giggles and mismatched socks, was asleep on the couch. Her favorite blanket was pulled up to her chin. The TV glowed blue in the dark, murmuring a cartoon lullaby. He was about to take the first bite when he smelled it. Plastic. Burning. He turned, eyes narrowing, and saw it, a thin line of smoke bleeding from the corner of the ceiling. Then a burst, a sudden, hungry flicker in the wall socket. Sparks, flames reaching like fingers. The pan hit the floor. June. His voice cracked. She blinked awake just as the room lit orange. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He grabbed her, blanket and all, and ran. The hallway was already thick with heat. Paint bubbled on the walls. The air screamed. June cried into his chest. "What's happening?" "Just hold on," he choked out. "I've got you." Down the stairs. Smoke clung to him, clawed at his throat. His eyes stung. They reached the bottom. Shouts outside. Sirens distant. He burst through the front door into the icy air of November and didn't stop until they hit the sidewalk. June coughed in his arms, small and shaking. A neighbor screamed. More people poured out of the building. A man shouted for help. His dog was still inside. Another woman sobbed, clutching a laundry basket. Luke turned back, and that's when it hit him. Mom. She hadn't come home that night, but she had been there earlier. On the couch, unmoving, pale. He had checked her breathing. Shallow, like always. The pills were still on the table. He looked toward the window. The flames had spread to the roof. Firefighters arrived. Hoses hissed. He didn't say anything, just knelt on the curb, holding his sister tighter. Because deep down, he already knew. The body they pulled out 2 hours later. He didn't need to see her face. He just turned June's head away and covered her ears. The next few days blurred. They moved from a Red Cross shelter to a friend's garage. That didn't last. The friend's landlord said no. They ended up in his mother's old sedan, the one she never let him drive until she couldn't drive anymore. He parked near the edge of town. Near a park, sometimes a Walmart. Always moving, always quiet, always careful not to draw attention. He still got June to her preschool every day. Still made peanut butter sandwiches in the front seat. Still brushed her hair with trembling fingers and told her stories at night while the engine clicked as it cooled. He never told her they were homeless. Just said they were camping. Just for a little while. And when she asked about their mom, he'd smile, lie through his teeth. "She's watching over us now, okay? She's just up there." June would look up at the ceiling of the car. In the stars. He nodded, barely able to breathe. "Yeah, the brightest one." She'd smile and go to sleep with her hand in his. By the time school started again, he had learned how to hide the dark circles, how to keep extra deodorant in his locker, how to stay late enough to shower in the gym, how to be invisible, because if they knew, they'd take June. Or worse, he could survive anything. But losing her? No, never. So he stayed quiet, drew in his sketchbook, got decent grades, ate what he could, and when the nights got cold, he curled around her in the back seat, whispered old bedtime songs, and pretended the rumble of passing trucks was just thunder from a dream. The sky was bruised purple, late afternoon melting into early dusk. The field behind the school, where other students once sprinted and shouted and laughed, now sat empty, except for one figure near the rusted bleachers. Luke, hood up, knees pulled to his chest, backpack like a shield beside him. He had nowhere else to go. The wind pressed against the grass. Dry leaves rolled like tumbleweeds. His sketchbook lay open in his lap. He wasn't drawing, just staring. His pencil hung in his hand like it no longer belonged there. Footsteps. Soft, careful ones. He didn't look up, but he felt them. Then a gentle voice. Not scolding, not suspicious, just curious. Luke. He blinked, looked up slowly. Ms. Reyes, English teacher, kind eyes. The only one who didn't flinch when she called on him in class, even when he barely spoke above a whisper. She wore a long coat and held a thermos. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement. "Did you miss your ride?" she asked, trying to smile, but her tone carried something else, something heavier. He shrugged, one shoulder, tight. Her smile faded. She sat on the bottom bleacher, a respectful distance away. Not too close, not too far, just enough to let him breathe. "You're always here late," she said softly. "Yesterday, the day before." No answer. She tried again. "Do your parents work nights?" Still nothing. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Look, why don't you go home?" The words hovered in the air like cold mist. His breath caught. His fingers curled around the pencil tighter. For a second, she thought he wouldn't respond. But then, he turned to her. Eyes hollow, voice like paper crumpling. "I don't have one." She blinked. Home." He nodded, barely. Silence. Even the wind paused. She swallowed, tried to steady her voice. "Since when?" Luke looked away. "Since the fire." 2 words. And yet the weight of his entire life fell with him. Her hand trembled slightly. She didn't speak right away, didn't rush to fill the silence with pity or apologies or lectures. Instead, she did something Luke didn't expect. She just stayed. He glanced at her from the corner of his eye, expected her to get up, call security, tell the principal, maybe worse. But she didn't move. Instead, she looked out at the fading sky. "I lost my house in a hurricane when I was 13, she said, quietly. "We slept in a church for a month. I still wake up thinking I'm in that pew." Luke's brow furrowed. She offered a gentle smile, not of sympathy, but of understanding. "Where do you sleep now?" He didn't want to say it, didn't want to watch her face change. But something about her presence made the truth less sharp. He gestured vaguely toward the parking lot. "Car." She nodded once. No horror, no shock, just a long breath. Then silence. He returned his gaze to the sketchbook. She leaned over, slowly, and caught a glimpse of what he'd drawn earlier. It was a house. Not grand, not fancy, but warm, with light in every window and a tiny stick-figure girl in the front yard. He turned the page, ashamed, but she had already seen it, and her eyes were glassy now. "Look, what do you need?" That question, no one had ever asked it like that before. Not as a formality, not out of duty, but as if the answer mattered. He didn't speak, just stared at the page, and whispered, a chance. It started with a knock on the counselor's door. Not the kind that demanded attention, not the kind that interrupted with urgency, just a quiet, deliberate knock. Ms. Reyes stood in the doorway, a file pressed to her chest. Her brow was knit, her voice steady. "We need to talk about Luke." Mr. Bennett, the school counselor, looked up from his laptop. Luke who? Luke Harrison. He blinked. The kid who got suspended for sleeping in the library? She nodded. Yes, that Luke. A pause. You might want to hear this. The next hour unfolded in careful whispers, printouts, a few bookmarked essays from his English portfolio, and then a sketchbook. The counselor turned each page slowly. Charcoal portraits of people he likely passed in the halls. Vivid, haunting stills of classmates smiling, more life in these drawings than some had ever shown in real time. But buried in the back were pages of numbers, receipts, pay stubs, a handwritten schedule that detailed every shift at the diner, every tutoring session, every hour he spent delivering groceries before and after school. And tucked beneath that, a legal document. Emergency guardianship of Ellie Harrison. Age 9. Signed. Notarized. Official. Mr. Bennett's hand froze mid-page. He's her guardian? Ms. Reyes nodded. Since their aunt overdosed last winter. The counselor sat back, his voice hollow. I didn't know. None of us did. They pulled up his records. Straight S. 0 absences until the suspension. National merit essay. Ranked top 3% in the district. SAT scores? Off the charts. He had written an op-ed for the school paper once, under a pseudonym. It was titled, "The Quiet Ones Are Carrying More Than You Think." They reviewed his file in stunned silence. And then they looked at each other. How did we miss this? Bennett whispered. Later that afternoon, Ms. Reyes walked into the principal's office, laid the folder down on his desk like a verdict, and said with cold fire in her voice, "You suspended a boy who sleeps in his car, raises his sister, holds 2 jobs, and still outperforms half the school. Without help, without excuses, just quiet strength." The principal stared down at the documents. His fingers tapped against the wood. For the first time in his career, he was speechless. "Fix it," she said. "All of it." Meanwhile, Luke sat under the same bleachers as before. He didn't know what they had discovered, didn't know what conversations were unfolding behind closed doors. All he knew was that he had 1 sandwich left for dinner, and his sister had the other half, and that tomorrow he would show up again, because that's what people who've been forgotten learn to do. Show up. Anyway, the gym was full. Bleachers groaned under the weight of sneakers and cell phones. Buzzing voices filled the space like static before a storm. No one really listened during assemblies. They scrolled. They whispered. They waited to be dismissed, until the principal stepped up to the mic and cleared his throat. A pause. Then, "Today, we honor someone not for what he said, but for what he endured, for who he proved himself to be when no one was watching." Silence. Whispers stopped. A few heads turned. The principal looked over his notes, then abandoned them completely. "Some of you know Luke Harrison." A rustle. A shift. Luke sat near the corner of the gym, hoodie up, shoulders tight. He didn't know this was happening. Ms. Reyes had only said, "Come to the assembly, please." His name echoed. He stared at the polished gym floor. A scuff mark. A knot in the wood. The principal continued. "Some of you laughed when he got suspended." Now the silence was thick, almost bitter. What none of us knew was that Luke wasn't just a student here. He was also a guardian, a provider, a survivor. A few jaws dropped. Some students blinked. The auditorium felt heavier now. Since losing his family, Luke has raised his little sister alone. He's worked nights. He's studied during lunch. He's made honor roll every semester. And not once did he ask for anything in return. Murmurs, shifting feet, and then rising. Ms. Reyes stood first, quietly, steadily, her hands folded in front of her chest. Then a student in the front row. then another, and another, until the entire senior class was on its feet. Even the ones who had once laughed. Even the ones who used to pass Luke in the hallway and whisper behind his back. Even the ones who never noticed him at all. They stood, and they clapped. Loud, long, unapologetically. Luke looked up slowly, confusion etched in every line of his face. His fingers gripped the edge of the folding chair. The applause poured down like rain on dry earth. He didn't move, didn't speak, but something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker of disbelief, of release, of being seen. Across the gym, one of the boys who had mocked him during PE wiped his nose on his sleeve and wouldn't meet Luke's eyes. Another, the girl who once posted a photo of him sleeping in the hallway with a cruel caption, clapped with her head bowed low. This moment didn't erase everything, but it carved something new into the school's walls. Respect. And maybe, finally, remorse. The principal raised a hand. Luke, would you join us here? He didn't want to. He hated spotlights. But Ms. Reyes gave a small nod. A whisper from across the space. Let them see the real you. Luke stood. Each step across the gym floor was louder than the clapping. When he reached the stage, the principal didn't hand him a trophy or a plaque, just a mic. Luke stared at it. His heart pounded. And then, just loud enough for the first 2 rows to hear. I never needed applause, just a place to belong. He handed the mic back, walked off stage, and left an echo in the gym that would stay long after the bell rang. The front door creaked open. Luke stood on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, hand hovering above the doorknob like it might vanish if he touched it. He had been here once before, when Ms. Reyes dropped off a folder. But this time, it was his room, his bed, his chance. Inside, the hallway smelled like cinnamon and something warm. A dog barked once, then stopped. The floor creaked in welcome. Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, smile soft. Hi, Luke. We're so glad you're here. He didn't know how to respond. He wanted to say thank you, something bigger than the word deserved. But his throat tightened, so he just nodded. She stepped aside, motioning him in. Down the hall, a boy his age waved awkwardly from the living room. A man rose from the kitchen table with an easy smile. No judgment, no questions, just space. For the first time in years, Luke didn't feel like a burden entering a room. Upstairs, a twin bed with a navy comforter waited. A real mattress. A desk with a lamp. A tiny corkboard above it, already pinned with a note. Welcome home, Luke. You're not alone anymore. Ms. Reyes. He sat down slowly, staring at the words like they might disappear. In his hand, he still clutched the key. It wasn't much. A standard brass key with a blue plastic cover. But to him, it was everything. A key meant trust. It meant someone believed you'd come back. That night, he lay awake longer than he meant to. Not because he was afraid, but because the silence was too kind, too soft. Not cold like a school hallway floor. Not loud like traffic passing a shelter door. Just quiet. Safe. The next morning, something shifted. Luke walked through the school gates like he belonged. Not hunched. Not braced for stairs. Just walking. A few students nodded. A couple smiled. Even the front desk lady, who used to watch him like he might steal the stapler, offered a soft, "Good morning, Luke." In first period, an announcement crackled through the speakers. This week, the Harrison Scholarship Fund will begin accepting donations to support students experiencing housing insecurity. If you're interested in contributing, please visit the main office. Luke froze. Ms. Reyes looked over from her desk. She didn't smile big, she just gave him that knowing look. The kind that said, "Yes, that's for you." but also for everyone like you. In the hallway, someone clapped him on the back. Another passed him a folded note. You're the reason I asked my parents about volunteering. Thank you. Each word he read felt like weight falling off. He wasn't the kid from the library floor anymore. He was Luke, the one they stood for, the one they now saw. That afternoon, he helped Mrs. Thompson with groceries, took the dog out, did homework at the dinner table. The warmth in his chest wasn't from the soup. It was from something deeper. Stability, safety, hope. He'd been given a gift, not just a roof, but belief. And for the first time, he dared to believe in himself, too. The gym was filled to the rafters. Caps hung on fingertips. Gowns rustled with nerves. Parents craned over railings, squinting to spot their child. Flashbulbs popped. Laughter echoed in corners. But Luke Harrison stood backstage. He clutched a folded sheet of paper. The edges were wrinkled from how many times he'd gripped it, smoothed it, almost thrown it away. His name was about to be called. His palms sweated through the sleeves of his borrowed gown. He could hear his heartbeat louder than the microphone feedback. Front row, Ms. Reyes nodded once. Calm, steady, unwavering. Next to her, Mrs. Thompson wiped her eyes already. She hadn't even heard the speech. And somewhere in the crowd, a student whispered, "Isn't that the homeless kid?" But the voice didn't land like it used to. Not anymore. Luke stepped into the light. One step, then another. A hush fell over the crowd. Some students leaned forward, curious. Others whispered, unsure. And Luke looked out across the room full of people who, once upon a time, never looked at him at all. He unfolded the paper, but didn't read it. Instead, he breathed, one shaky inhale. Then, I used to think being invisible kept me safe. His voice cracked. No one moved. I used to think, if no one noticed me, they couldn't hurt me. His eyes found Ms. Reyes. She mouthed, "Keep going." But silence. He paused. His hands trembled slightly. Silence can be a cage. Now you could hear the ceiling fans. Nothing else. When I slept in a hallway, no one asked why. When I stopped eating lunch, no one noticed. When I stopped speaking, the world got comfortable. Because I made myself small enough to ignore. The crowd didn't blink. But one teacher, one moment, changed that. He looked directly at Ms. Reyes. Someone saw me, asked a question, and didn't walk away. His voice grew stronger. We don't all come to school from the same place. Some of us carry more than just a backpack. A girl in the crowd lowered her head, tears welling in her eyes. Some of us are holding broken homes in our pockets. Some of us are just trying to survive long enough to matter. Luke stepped closer to the mic. But we do matter. His voice didn't shake now. We always have. Even when the world doesn't know our name. Silence. Then one clap. Then three. Then the entire room erupted. Not out of pity. Not out of guilt. But because they had finally heard him. Not the rumors. Not the whispers. Him. Luke stepped back. Tears in his eyes. Paper still in hand. Unread but unnecessary. As the crowd rose to its feet, he looked up, above the heads, past the lights, into the echoing rafters. For the first time in his life, the silence felt like home. For a moment, there was only stillness. No one sat. No one blinked. And then the sound came. Like rain on rooftops. Light, then heavier, then deafening. Applause. Real, raw, reverent. A standing ovation. The gym shook with it. Some students clapped through tears. Others just stood frozen, as if seeing Luke for the first time. Not the kid who once ducked through halls, face down and silent, but the one who just stood tall in front of hundreds, speaking truth with his whole chest. Luke's lips trembled, not from fear, from release. A breath he didn't know he'd been holding all his life finally left him. His eyes scanned the crowd, so many of them now cheering, even some who once whispered and laughed. Even them. And then, a flash of motion. Luke. A small figure burst from the second row. The crowd parted. It was her, Emma, his little sister. Ponytail bouncing, eyes wide and shining. She raced past teachers and parents in caps on laps. And he dropped everything, his speech, his composure, and opened his arms. She launched into him. He caught her. Their embrace folded in on itself, both arms and ears wrapping tighter. He knelt to the stage, forehead to hers. She was sobbing. "You did it," she whispered. He didn't answer, just held her tighter, because they both knew what it meant. It wasn't just a speech, not just applause. It was proof that pain didn't have to end you, that beginnings sometimes come wrapped in endings, and that being seen, truly seen, was the most powerful thing in the world. Behind them, Ms. Reyes wiped her cheek with her sleeve. The principal stood still, a hand over his heart. Even the assistant janitor in the far corner was clapping with quiet pride. Luke stood slowly, lifting Emma with him. Together, they turned to face the crowd. The lights above warmed their skin. The sound of feet stomping echoed like thunder. Luke's voice, barely audible, leaned toward his sister's ear. "We're gonna be okay." She nodded against his chest. For the first time in forever, they both believed it. And as they walked off that stage, not as shadows, not as ghosts, not as cautionary tales, but as survivors. The crowd never stopped clapping, not for a long time. The auditorium emptied slowly, caps tucked under arms, parents pulling tissues from purses, laughter in the hallways. But on the stage, silence. Luke stood alone for a moment longer, staring at the crowd's footprints on the floorboards, as if trying to imprint them into memory. His fingers grazed the edge of the podium one last time. He wasn't sure what to feel. Lighter? Seen? Maybe. But mostly, he just felt still. Like for the first time in a long time, the world had stopped spinning beneath his feet. From the back row, Ms. Reyes watched, her hands clasped, her eyes soft. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She just let the silence wrap around him. Luke exhaled, slow and full. Then, a voiceover begins, not loud, not preachy, just steady, warm, like someone who finally knows what it means to be heard. You never know what someone's carrying. Cut to Luke walking past the school library, where a janitor once found him asleep. He glances in, just for a second, then keeps walking, until you stop assuming. Cut to a group of students laughing beside the vending machines. They quiet when they see Luke. One of them nods, just a small, guilty nod. Luke nods back, just once, then walks on, and start asking. Cut to Ms. Reyes pulling a folded flyer from her purse, something about a scholarship. She smiles, sets it on her desk. On it, in pen, for Luke. The camera drifts upward, catching the ceiling tiles of the auditorium. The echo of his final words still faint in the air, then fades to a shot of Luke's backpack, faded canvas, worn straps, heavy with everything he owns. And now, tucked in one of the side pockets, his diploma. The weight hasn't left his shoulders, but now someone helped him carry it. Final voiceover line. Some people are hard to see until you really look. So look, ask, and maybe, just maybe, listen. Fade to black.